So, I think that shows us a side of the temptation that we would probably never think about. You know, when we read about the temptation of Jesus, we think those are kind of weird questions that he's being asked that don't seem to relate to us, you know. And I think the popularity thing, you know, doing things, seeking the approval of others is very relevant to Jesus' temptation. Have you ever been really tempted? I remember quitting smoking at 23 after smoking for 10 years, and how hard that was. Every day was a temptation. It was like an extended temptation. It was really hard. I remember flying off the handle at people, throwing tools on the construction site, just being really crabby most of the time. And it seemed like I could smell a cigarette through the wall, you know, for a long period of time. And as a construction worker working outside, there were no like, you're inside and you're safe and you're outside and you're not, because most of the time, no one's too worried about people smoking in a building that isn't completed yet. And so people would just seem like they were smoking everywhere, all the time. It drove me crazy for years as I quit smoking. And we've all been tempted, I think, at various points in our lives, but sometimes temptation can come like a direct attack for us. You know, a personal assault that points right at our hearts. Seems like the enemy is sometimes really trying to get us to be tempted in just the right way, at just the right time, when we are at our weakest, when we're the most vulnerable. Have you ever felt like that? You know, in the scriptures, the devil is compared to a roaring lion that looks around for people to devour. Have you ever had that feeling that you were under his gaze? He was eyeing you like a pork chop, you know? I've sure felt it. One time after, maybe many of you might not know, because a lot of you do, but I was a heroin addict, an atheist before I was a pastor. And when I first got clean and sober, it was a pretty rough time. And I remember those first 2 months were just brutal. You know, the first 2 years were brutal. But I remember this one time I was working on a Safeway, and it was open during construction. And me and my stepdad had pulled in. It was far away, and because of the customers, we had to be there like really, really early. And we had stopped along the way and gotten some coffee and some donuts and tried to have a little moment, you know, before the grind came again. And so we pulled off in the spot of the parking lot, and we had our coffee and our donuts, and I opened the door to the truck, and right there, I mean, this massive parking lot, it's as big, it's like 3 times or 4 times as big as the Walmart parking lot in town. I mean, it's a massive parking lot. Open the door, and right outside of the door are 5 bloody needles and a bloody tourniquet, like right there. It was like it completely ruined this moment, you know, of my day. And I wasn't tempted to do drugs, but I was tempted to just give up and quit, because it seemed for that instant that I would never escape seeing things like this. That this was kind of like a victory at the heart level for me, for the devil. Because I just looked at it and I was like, man, it just took the wind right out of my sails. It was going to be a long, long day. You know, when I looked at that, my stomach constricted, and my heart started beating rapidly, and it just felt this come over me, this kind of exhaustion, this kind of struggle fired right back up in my heart. Let's just say that I was tempted to give up on how far I'd come and just go back to the familiar insanity that I had come from. You know, I just thought I would see stuff like this or struggle like this for the rest of my life, and I just wasn't going to make it. Now, there's a difference between, in English anyway, of the words tempted and tested. And they both have different connotations and different expectations that we have when we use those words. In English, when we use the word tempted, we think of the expectation that you would fail. We think about someone hoping that someone would sin, fall into sin and fail. And when we use the word testing, there's kind of this understanding that we're hoping maybe that they would pass the test, that they would be proved worthy of the challenge and make it. You know, in Greek, the word that's used here is more this testing style. It's for Matthew, the author of the gospel. It wasn't Jesus' temptation in the desert. It was Jesus' testing in the desert. And I think that whole perspective helps us to see that Jesus was going to make it, you know. was going to be hard, but Jesus was going to make it. So, my wife, Liz, she watches a lot of cooking shows. And I used to joke that her mother, who's here today, read her recipes instead of children's books growing up. I mean, she's a wonderful cook. But she watches these cooking shows. And one of the shows that she watches is called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Wow. You've probably seen the show. You've probably seen the show. It's about this guy who travels around the country eating at all the greasy spoons that he can find. All that food that I crave, He just goes all around the country. And sometimes she watches this to inspire her to make some wonderful meals. And as I watch this show, after the first 5 minutes, my mouth starts to water. And after the first 10 minutes, I just get this urge to just go polish off like an entire bag of chips. In 15 minutes, I want to go get like a whole quart of ice cream. Have you ever felt like, I have a feeling that if I watched that show as often as my wife does, that I would be like 300 pounds. And it wouldn't take very long to get there. In our men's group, we're going through the spiritual disciplines in Richard Foster's book, Celebration of Discipline. And last week we were talking about fasting. And we were joking, we were talking about how in our day and age, no one ever talks about fasting. I mean, it's the complete opposite mentality that we have here. So no one talks about fasting, let alone tries it out, as we were talking about experimenting in. And I don't know if you've ever tried fasting, but fasting at its core is kind of this experiment of pushing yourself into deeper prayer. It's the idea that our hunger games, that our being in touch with our need would push us to God, not to just frustration or all these other things that many of you who have tried probably have experienced. In recognizing our need, it points us to the source of the fulfillment of those needs. And it's no surprise in our country where we pioneered things like the drive-through, watch shows like Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, that fasting has kind of fallen out of fashion. And I'll be honest, I've had some pretty horrible experiences fasting. It's not my favorite thing to try to do. I get really cranky, to say the least. I get this splitting headache nearly every single time I try. And I've never tried to do it for more than 2 days, but I can tell you from just that little tiny taste of that experience that when it talks about Jesus being hungry, I mean, this is a hunger that a lot of us can't relate to. I mean, even 2 days, or most of us have never gone 2 days without food, even a whole day without food. And this is 40 days? That's crazy, right? So anyway, this would have been for Jesus perhaps the hungriest point in his life, the hungriest point that we could ever imagine in our own. And this was a test, and Jesus is sitting in this desert where there's all these rocks around that actually look a whole lot like a loaf of bread. This wasn't too far of a stretch to think about turning a stone into bread. I bet if you were wandering around in the desert for 40 days, you would have had the thought a time or two. And so this is Jesus at his weakest. The moment that would reveal what was really underneath who Jesus was at the core. There's a couple ways that we talk about this time of testing theologically, Lots of people see it kind of as the counterpart to Adam's temptation in Genesis. And here we see, rather than the garden, we see these desolate circumstances that come about because of their disobedience. And Jesus is being tested the same way as Adam, and yet he succeeds where Adam failed. Others see it as kind of Jesus as personifying Israel in their time of wandering through the desert, being led around by God for a long, long time because they just kept failing and struggling to get it. And so whatever you think about this time, it's a big deal. The Spirit drawing Jesus into the desert, it's a big deal. There's something that's being undone here that's hinted at, something important. And so, it's a hard time, it's a big time. And whatever you make of it, something is clear, that God had a purpose for this, drawing Jesus into the desert. And I think this time pushed Jesus to the very reveals that even at his weakest, even at the most run-down state we have seen Jesus at this point in the story, he's still stronger than the devil. You know, unlike Adam, who fell under temptation, or the Israelites who kept failing and circling Mount Sinai, so to speak, here we see Jesus showing his true strength underneath it all. He didn't cheat. He didn't exercise and use his divine authority to pass this test. He did it just as we do, relying on God's grace to meet us in our need. There's a wonderful Catholic writer named Henry Nouwen, and he writes a book about leadership that's really good. And it looks at Jesus' time in the desert and looks at this temptation through the eyes of what being a Christian leader or just a disciple in general would mean. And he sees in the temptation of Jesus to be seen as relevant. You know? And don't get me wrong, relevancy can be a good thing. In lots of circumstances, it's good to have relevant information or relevant things going on. But seeking relevance for its own sake can get us stuck in the trap of seeking approval from others. And we can find ourselves not really worshiping God, not really thinking about God first, but thinking about other people and putting them in a position that they should never be at, rather than seeking our final approval from God. And Jesus could have turned those stones into bread. He could have used his power of God, his power to serve his own ends. He could have instantly sustained his hungry body. He could have turned stones into bread and launched his ministry career with a huge bang. You know, like that video pointed us to, this idea of Jesus kind of looking out at the people and thinking, what should I do next? That is not the approach that Jesus took. And it's not as though feeding a bunch of people or feeding people in general was something that Jesus was opposed to. We see later in his miracles that he loved to feed people, spent 5,000 people at one time. You know? So it wasn't just that it was a wrong thing, it was that the timing was off. It was that the circumstances were not right. Jesus would have been putting relevance to people or his own need ahead of God if he had taken this shortcut that was offered. So unlike the video that we saw earlier, Jesus wasn't this entertainer superstar who was seeking fame. He didn't do what he did for the ratings. There's a wonderful Bible scholar that I love. His name is Eugene Peterson. And if you've ever read The Message, it's this kind of paraphrase of the Bible in the English of our time, even in our culture, really. He's responsible for that. He's a Greek scholar, and one time he was being interviewed on TV by this person about his work with The Message. And this interviewer had heard that at one point, Bono, the rock star from U2, had wanted to get together with Peterson. He'd been reading his releases of The Message as they had come out, and he just wanted to connect with him and just tell him how much this work had meant to him. And Peterson had turned him down. And this interviewer was just mystified by how this guy could turn down having Bono over at his house as his guest. You know? And he just kept saying over and over to Peterson, but it was Bono. You know? It's Bono, the rock star, the philanthropist, maybe the most interesting person that could have ever come into your life. It's Bono. And you didn't make an exception for Bono? And Peterson, in his interview, said, but it was Isaiah. You know? It was Isaiah the prophet. You know, he literally was more on the Word of God than the temporal things that he was offering at that moment. And in a similar way, Jesus points us beyond just the relevant and back to things that are more important than the tyranny of the urgent or the call of the hip, the needs of the moment. And I have a few friends who are hipsters, you know, from Oregon. It's like the hipster state, I think. There's plenty of people who are hipsters. Recently they did a study on hipsters to find out what makes them tick, believe it or not. It turns out that when a hipster likes music, they really like liking music that no one else likes. So they look for these obscure bands, you know, and they find the best that they can find from these up-and-coming new people, and they start liking this musician. But later, if everybody else starts liking the musician or looking for the next big thing to come along. So it's not about the music or the quality of the music. It's also about whether other people like it or don't like it. So, by definition, seeking relevance means focusing on the new. It means being a slave to the moment. The temptation is one that we all face at one point or another, whether we're in the desert, at various points in our lives, we're tempted by this. To be seen a certain way, to present ourselves a certain way, to try to get our identity from what other people think about us, to commit the idolatry of the now. You know, we want acceptance. We want people to think that we're cool. We want people to like us. And we set our minds on the ever-changing stream of the present moment, keeping an eye on the eternal things that stretch beyond that. So Jesus answers back to this temptation. People don't live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. He calls us beyond the temporal concerns of our daily needs and even our individual needs. He calls us to a God-first life. There's another scholar I like named William Barclay, and he tries to point out the meaning of what Jesus meant when he said these words, kind of in our language. And he puts it, the only true satisfaction is the way that has learned complete dependence on God. When we get our identity from other places, we'll never be satisfied. Popularity might make our lives easier for a little bit, but popularity as an end to itself can destroy us. You know, if we live our life seeking the approval of others, it's not going to be a very happy life. We might get all the physical bread in the world. The physical bread without the spiritual nourishment that goes along with it falls really short of what it is that Jesus is offering all of us. I've been reading a book about prayer called To Pray and to Love, and the person draws a lot from the writings of the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and you probably don't know what I'm talking about when I say that, but in church history, about the 3rd century, there were these people, when Christianity became legalized, it became like the official religion of the state, they were afraid that it would get watered down. And so they went off to the desert, literally. A lot of them lived in caves, lived in the desert, and it was a place that you would only go there if you wanted that. If you wanted to be pure before God, maybe. If you wanted to be set apart from society. And there are all kinds of interesting stories about people during this time. Really, really interesting people. These people who were radical Christians at the time and just wanted to live a life radically set apart for God. In one story, there's this hermit, and I forget his name, but someone approaches him and asks him how he could grow spiritually. And the hermit gives him some strange advice, kind of like the Kung Fu movie, you know, like the applicant waits on the porch for 3 days kind of thing. He tells him to go off into a graveyard and to curse every single grave that he sees, to spend the rest of the day cursing every single grave that he sees. The man comes back the next day and he says, I did what you said. And he says, sends him back to the graveyard and he says, I want you to bless and praise every single person buried in the graveyard. Spend the rest of the day doing that. And the next day he comes back and he says, I did what you said. And the hermit tells him that if you want to grow spiritually, you must be like the dead men of the graveyard, unaffected by the praises and the curses of people. Live your life only as affected by God. It's his advice. You know, God calls us to be a people with a message beyond the moment. In order to respond to temptation like Jesus did, we must prune our lives from those other voices that tell us other things, that want to control us, that want to draw us away from the bigger picture of life with God that we're called, each of us, to live out. The church is all about relationships. It's not about programs. It's not about what you get out of it. The church is about relationship. It's not about slick marketing. It isn't about religious goods and services that can be peddled and sold. It isn't even about the burning issues of our day, as important as they are. The church is about relationship. And Jesus is not a magician to be controlled. He doesn't come to entertain the world. He doesn't come to redefine himself for the approval of others. He doesn't allow that faulty reasoning that we have of instant gratification to lead him away from his mission. So he doesn't bring that fresh, relevant tweet or soundbite that would be super relevant to the world around him. Unlike the video, Jesus really does his own stunts. And he does them for different reasons. But he does offer us a path through this desert of the present moment. He invites us to have a relationship with him that can put the whole world back into perspective. And a trip through the desert, whether that's physically or metaphorically, can show us that the truth that Barclay points out when he says the only true way to satisfaction is the way that is learned through complete dependence on God. So Jesus points us beyond our own needs. He points us beyond the meaningless quest for relevance and the approval of others. And he points us toward the God who is far above these things and can lead us around the traps that they present for us. God calls us to a God-first life, a life where we are sustained by God. We seek God. We search out God in the Bible, in the Scriptures, in the example of Jesus, and we strip away anything that would pull us away from that. Church isn't about us, it's about God. Life isn't even about us, it's about God. We are to be people who are called to bring that relationship that we experience out into the world with us. You know, the relationship that we have brings us close to God, brings us closer to each other. And we are people of a message of God reconciling the world to himself, not reconciling himself to the world. And without all that, all the bread in the world is completely worthless. So we're going to go into a time of open worship, which is a silent time of waiting for God to speak. If you feel that God is tapping you on the shoulder and has a message to bring forth through you this morning, we believe that God is still speaking and he can speak through anyone, even now. And so if you feel God tapping you on the shoulder, I invite you to stand and someone will bring a microphone to you and you share what's on your heart. And good advice for that would be to let your words be few and full. So as we go into this time, think about the desert. Think about how sometimes we redefine ourselves for others and how we can learn from Jesus.